PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. We are in for a dramatic finish in the candidates tournament. Stick around, I've got a great game to show you. Quick reminder that going into round 13, 3 players shared the lead. Gukesh, Nakamura and Nippon-Nishi, with Caruana just a half point behind. Now the game I'd like to show you is Domaraja Gukesh against Alireza Firouzja. So a reminder that in the first half of the tournament, Firouzja inflicted quite a painful loss on Gukesh. Terrible time pressure blunder. And Firouzja cleaned up. Normally Gukesh is so cool. So would that be weighing on his shoulders here? You know, would he be fearful of time pressure? Would that have some kind of psychological impact on his play? So anyway, Gukesh with white, and it's a Spanish, a Berlin, and instead of going for the endgame, Gukesh plays d3, keeps more tension in the position. Bishop c5, and Gukesh decides to castle here. Bishop takes c6 is the most popular move here. But castles, and now knight d4. This looks a little bit weird to move this piece again, but actually it has a good reputation. I mean, it stops white from exchanging here and rather leaves that bishop sort of dangling in the air on b5. Yeah, I mean, black does pretty well from this position. The most popular move is bishop a4, but bishop c4 played very quickly from Gukesh. That's a little bit inaccurate, because if you put the bishop back to a4, then sometimes there's the option of going back to c2 in one move. Bishop c4 is unusual, and in fact Firouzja comes out of the opening very well indeed. There you can see the bishop has had to go back, and yeah, it might land here anyway. a5. This gains space, but also gives the bishop the option to fall back on to a7, so maintaining its position on this diagonal. Knight c4, and there you go, bishop a7 keeps its active position. It's nice for black to gain space with a5 anyway. And knight e3 from Gukesh, that was his first really big think. Spent almost 20 minutes on that move. I think Gukesh must have realised that he'd played inaccurately and was struggling to find any advantage here. I think we can see that black has a very regular pawn structure, very easy development for these bishops. The knight is on a good square. I mean, I don't think there's any reason why white should have the advantage in this position. Queen f3. I mean, if this bishop were the other side of that knight, then I'd be saying, well, this looks very pleasant for white. But with the bishop blocked by the knight, then that's a problem. And d5 from Firouzja, and everything is fine for black. I mean, if you can achieve this d5 break, then black is doing absolutely fine in this position. So, for example, if pawn takes pawn, you push the bishop back, and you can see that that's a lovely centre for black. So Gukesh just fell back with the bishop, just preempting a4. g6, that takes away the f5 square. Rook e1, you can see white is a little bit cramped. It's that knight that gets in the way of the bishop. Bishop e6, very easy development. Now if white just kind of passes here, then black has very easy moves. You can see I've highlighted these pawn advances on the queen side. You know, all these are possible. Potentially a4, b5, d4. And, what is white doing in the meantime? It's not easy. So Gukesh decided to open up the middle, which, gives black these nice pawns, but at least there is a little bit of play on the e-file. And in fact, it's not too bad for white. King g7 looks like a normal move here, just to sort of protect those dark squares. Rook e8 played, slightly inaccurate from Firouzja. Bishop a4. Now it gets a little bit messy. Obviously rook e7 not possible, because if queen takes knight, you don't want to move the rook back. So, and bishop is not possible to block with bishop d7, that just gets taken. So e4, so Firouzja had to push on, had to commit this pawn. And that means that, you know, these squares can potentially be used for white. But still, I mean, black is doing absolutely fine here, and has this kingside pawn majority, 4 against 3. You've always got to look at the pawn structure and see how that determines strategy. Okay, I'm going to just pause for a moment and ask you, how would you play with white? Because Gukesh certainly hasn't solved all the problems in the position yet with white. So white to play, what would you do? Okay, you ever think, I'll have a drink. Knight f1. So this is very typical of Gukesh in a way. He's such a calm player, has a really calm personality. And although, you know, black has come out of the opening pretty well, white's position is still fine. He's found his feet. And knight f1 is a very simple move that means this bishop can enter the game somewhere. But also important that this knight goes back to f1, as we'll see. It covers some very important squares, including h2. Queen c7. There you go. You can see that, you know, in some positions it might be possible for black to set up this battery, but of course with the knight on f1 there's no danger. Bishop b3, yeah, that's an important piece. So Gukesh exchanges, and bishop e3. So yeah, you can see with these last moves, knight f1 and bishop e3, this important, powerful bishop on a7 is neutralized. And the position is roughly level here. a3. Yeah, so Firouzja is, you know, trying to stir things up. He's obviously trying to break up white's pawns, but very cool reaction, c4. And, you know, if there's an exchange here, you can see that the knight protects the pawn, and there might be the chance to play knight d5 at some point. So it's not so important that these pawns are split. You can see if black were to take, that queen actually stands beautifully on this square b2. So white is okay there. Firouzja played knight h5. So looking at the outpost here on f4, g3 stops that. Okay, so what's the big idea? Why did he play knight h5? Well, it's all about this. f5. So, you know, I mentioned pawn structure. These four pawns on the king side, this pawn majority, can be very dangerous if that pawn manages to advance to f4. This is very well known. You see it in the Sicilian, for example, if black achieves d5. So this raises the stakes, and is so typical of Firouzja and his style. You know, he's very aggressive. But actually, Gukesh said afterwards that he was very pleased to see this move, because it does expose black's king. That's the problem. So an exchange on c5 and rook d1. Right, well now we can see some of the disadvantages of the way that Firouzja has been playing. So he's been concentrating on the king side, but Gukesh simply puts a rook on the open file, and this is always going to give him counterplay. Rook f8. So Alireza swings over, these rooks looking nice, you know, about to support these pawns. I mean, this is tricky. Rook d5, rook looks great there. Queen e7, and now, before black gets an opportunity to play f4, Gukesh plays f4 himself. Very nice, exploiting the pin. Obviously that can't be taken en passant. Knight f6, the knight comes back to somewhere more sensible, and the rook goes back to d2. Yeah, I think very sensible to maintain the rook on the open file. G5, here we go. So typical Firouzja. He's raising the stakes. He's intent on attacking. That's why he wanted to get the f-pawn rolling, and he just continues with this strategy. But this is really risky because it does not only expose white's king, but black's as well. Now, if you wanted to be more sensible, if you were, I don't know, if you wanted to calm things down, then you could simply occupy the d-file. And I think there would probably be an exchange of rooks. It's about equal. But g5, well, all bets are off after this move. Knight e3, great blockading square for the knight. This is absolutely beautiful. Looking at f5, looking at d5, and making sure that that e-pawn is going absolutely nowhere. Exchange on f4. Queen f7, you can see both kings on the open file. So king h2. So whose king is safer here? Well, the king looks pretty safe on h2. And you can see that white's rooks look very good. That knight looks beautiful. That queen might be able to enter the game. And yeah, is black's king as safe on h8 as this one? Probably not, because it could get checked on this diagonal, whereas this diagonal is closed. So it's looking quite nice for white now. But this rook swings over. So it's an extremely unclear position. Rook d5, nice move. Hitting this pawn. Knight g7. Right, well that's the first indication that things, I think, are turning in white's direction. Because there is pressure on this pawn and black's knight has had to fall back. Rook d1. Taking control, really good control of the d-file. But Firouzja is attacking. So the rook swings back onto the open file. So Firouzja blocks with rook g6 and rook d1. They're repeating the position. This is move 40. They were both in a little bit of time pressure. So they're repeating the moves to get to the time control at move 40. So that's move 41. And Gukesh, invested a few minutes to play this move. He thought he was a lot better in this position. In fact, black is still absolutely fine here. So, for example, queen h5 looks logical to me to attack this one. Rook g3 and then rook g6. Because, with the active queen, then, white always has to be a bit careful about the king. But rook g6 played by Firouzja. I mean, maybe he was anticipating that rook would just come back and, they're repeating the position. But queen h4. Yeah, a much stronger move, activating the queen. An exchange on g1 and king h8 played. The computers think that this is a good idea for black. And they think this is about equal, but I tell you what, this looks really, really dangerous. All white's pieces are active and the king's a little bit exposed. So might be equal for the computer, but for a human, not easy at all. King h8 looks like a very human move to me. King f2. Yeah, okay, that's stepping out of the open g file, and it's nice to bring the king towards the center actually. Rook g8. Queen g5. In fact, well, again, the computer thinks that queen h6 is more accurate, but I mean, queen g5 looks quite a natural move to put some pressure on this pawn. And here, Firouzja cracked. He played queen g6, offering an exchange of queens. In fact, it is possible to play knight e6. I mean, this doesn't, at first glance, it doesn't look very good. It looks like white is just winning this pawn. But queen g7 is tricky. Obviously, the queen would like to enter into the position on one of these squares. Queen e5 still looks absolutely fine for white. But in fact, here, black has sufficient counterplay. Pawns are equal. I mean, I think white still has the better chances here. You know, these pawns look a little bit vulnerable. The king is very poor. But the computer says that if black plays accurately, it should be a draw. Anyway, that was the way to go. But queen g6, this endgame is dreadful for black. Very important move. Next move. You have a little think. What should white play here? What did Gukesh play here? That's a great move. Multi-purpose move. Not only does it hit g6 and threaten to come to b6 to attack this pawn, but crucially it prevents the knight moving to e6, which would, you know, activate the knight, give black counterplay straight away. And white is winning. You know, for example, if king h7 protecting that pawn, rook b6, rook b8, knight d5. I mean, this is complete domination. You can see black's pieces are absolutely dreadful, and there's not a lot to stop the advance of the c-pawn. So, rook e8 played. Rook takes g6, thank you very much. Knight e6, right, so Firouzja wants to bring the knight into play. Attacking this one, but that knight has a beautiful square on d5. Knight d4, so he's getting tricky with this knight floating around in the position, but in fact, white is winning this one. Rook e7, yeah, an exchange of rooks will mean this one is going through, basically. That's too much. So rook h6, c5. Black's king is in a particularly bad position because it means that that will be fatal. It'll be a check and probably even checkmate. So, you know, when it comes to some kind of race or, you know, this is really fatal when the pawn reaches the 8th rank. Knight d4. A little bit shuffling here, a repetition, and then Gukesh realised after some calculation that he could just advance these pawns. Rook goes back, rook b7. So this is just about supporting these pawns, pushing the pawns through. You can see the king, black's king, is still in this desperate position on the 8th rank. And rook c7, so it's just making way for the b pawn to push through. And here Firouzja resigned. So if, for example, rook b2, b7, and then two threats, either rook c8 and b8 or knight b6, closing out the rook, and b8 and queen. I thought it was a fascinating struggle that sort of ebbed and flowed, but all the way through, Gukesh managed to maintain his equilibrium. Yes, he didn't have the best opening. You know, by this point, it seems as though, you know, black has, well, very good outcome from the opening. But Gukesh understood, well, it's not that bad. And, you know, by the time he got to this position, he's found his feet, and this is just a very equal struggle. Not a drawn position, but, you know, this could go any way, and it certainly did. And who was the coolest player when it came to the time pressure? Well, it was Gukesh. And after the game, I mean, if you take a look at his interviews, you'll find them online. I mean, he must be the coolest player on the planet. He's just extraordinary. 17 years old, and he just manages to maintain such focus, and he's so calm. He said he practices yoga and, you know, everyday sport. You know, sports. He does sport every day, like tennis, and maybe that helps. I don't know. But I think it's just his personality. That's just how he came out, basically. So, what a tense final day we were in for. So, the top game between Nakamura and Pomnishi, that was drawn. And so it means, and Caruana beat Praggnanandhaa in a, well, what a Herculean effort from Caruana. Very tense game, but he managed to eke out a win. So going into the final round, we have Gukesh on 8.5 points. Nepomniachtchi, Nakamura and Caruana all on 8. And they're all playing each other. This is the extraordinary thing. So in the last round, Nakamura plays Gukesh, Caruana plays Nepomniachtchi. So basically Nakamura, Caruana and Nepo all have to play for a win. Gukesh, well, a draw will certainly guarantee him a tiebreak. Remember, there will, there will be rapid play tiebreaks on Monday if there's a pile up basically at the end of this one. Stick around. It's going to be such a tense round 14. Thanks for watching.